My name is Serena Marsh. I am 34 years old, and I work as a forensic accountant for a firm that handles estate disputes, which means I spend most of my days reading documents that other people assume nobody would ever look at twice.
I was good at my job.
I was precise. I kept every record I had ever touched in a fireproof cabinet in the second bedroom of the house my mother-in-law left me when she died, and I kept them in reverse chronological order because I knew that the most important document in any estate was almost always the most recent one. That is the detail that mattered. Not later, from the beginning. The morning of my sister-in-law Carla's baby shower, I stood in my closet at 6:47 and pulled on a pair of navy flats I had owned for 3 years. They were clean. They were comfortable. They were the kind of shoes a woman wears when she expects to be on her feet for 4 hours carrying platters and refilling water glasses and smiling at people who had never once asked how she was doing. I picked up the blue folder from the top shelf of the cabinet before I left. I didn't open it. I knew what was inside. I had known since the afternoon the notary pressed her seal into the front page and handed it across the table to me, but I tucked it into the inner pocket of my tote bag the way I always did when I was leaving the house for anything that involved Carla. Not as a weapon. Not yet. Just the way a person carries an umbrella when the sky looks wrong. I locked the front door and drove to my mother-in-law's house, the house that was, as of 11 weeks prior, legally mine. Welcome back to Channel, where ordinary women face impossible families and answer with quiet strength instead of noise. If you've ever been laughed at in a room full of people who are supposed to love you, this one is for you. Drop a comment below and hit subscribe, and let's get back to Serena. The house on Delmarva Court had been in the Marsh family for 22 years. My mother-in-law, Dottie Marsh, had bought it with her second husband in 2001 and had lived in it alone since he passed in 2016. It was a cream-colored colonial with green shutters and a detached garage and a kitchen that smelled permanently of the cinnamon sachets Dottie kept in every drawer. I had spent more time in that kitchen than I had in my own apartment during the first 3 years my husband Daniel and I were together, before the wedding, before the move, before everything that came after. Dottie had liked me. She said once, over coffee, that I was the only person in her son's life who read the fine print. She said it like a compliment. I took it as one. I pulled into the driveway at 9:53, 7 minutes before guests were supposed to arrive, and Carla was already on the front porch with a clipboard. Carla Marsh, my sister-in-law, Daniel's younger sister by 4 years, was 30 years old and had the particular energy of a woman who had decided, sometime in her mid-20s, that competence in other people was a form of aggression directed specifically at her. She managed the family's rental property on Birch Street, which meant she collected checks twice a month and called a handyman when something broke, and she had been doing this since Dottie handed her the responsibility in 2019 without consulting anyone else in the family, including Daniel, including me. She looked at me when I came up the porch steps. She looked at my shoes. She didn't say anything yet. I carried the fruit tray inside and set it on the kitchen counter and began unwrapping it. The house was already arranged. Balloon arch in the living room, white tablecloths, a sign above the mantel that said Baby Marsh in gold foil letters. Everything looked like Carla had ordered it from the same website at the same time, which she probably had. My mother-in-law's reading chair was still in the corner. Nobody had moved it. I noticed that. Guests started arriving at 10. Carla's friends from her neighborhood association, her college roommate, 2 cousins from her father's side who I recognized but couldn't name. Daniel's Aunt Patricia arrived at 10:15 in a linen blazer and kissed Carla on both cheeks. Nobody kissed me. I was the one carrying the empty packaging to the recycling bin in the garage. At 10:32, I came back into the living room with a fresh tray of tea sandwiches, and Carla was standing in the center of the room with 8 women arranged around her in a loose semicircle, and she was looking at my feet. "Oh, Serena," she said. Her voice was warm. That was the thing about Carla. Her voice was always warm, in the same way that certain rooms are warm because they have no windows and nowhere for the heat to go. I didn't realize we were doing casual. She looked at the women around her. I told everyone smart casual, but I mean those shoes. She tipped her chin toward my feet. "Are those the ones you wear to the office?" I said nothing. Something in me had gone very flat, the way water goes flat before a storm, not still, just emptied of its surface movement. Two of the women smiled. One looked away. Patricia, to her credit, found something interesting to examine on the ceiling. I just mean, Carla said, still smiling, you might want to keep a pair of heels in the car. For events. Then she turned back to the room and resumed whatever she had been saying before I walked in, and the moment closed over itself, like water over a stone, and I stood there holding a tray of cucumber sandwiches with the blue folder pressing against my left hip from inside my tote bag, and I let that settle. I set the tray down. I went back to the kitchen. I ran cold water over my wrists for exactly 30 seconds, the way I did when a deposition was going badly, and I needed my hands to stop shaking before I picked up a pen. The Marsh family property situation had begun, as most property situations do, with someone dying and someone else moving faster than grief. Dottie Marsh passed on a Tuesday in March, 14 months before the baby shower. She had been in declining health for 2 years, a slow cardiac deterioration that her doctors had managed carefully and that I had tracked in a shared folder with her primary care physician's office, because Dottie had asked me to. Not Daniel. Not Carla.
Me.
Because I was the one who kept things. In the weeks before she died, Dottie had been clear-headed and specific. She had asked me to sit with her on a Thursday afternoon in January, in the reading chair that was now still in the corner of the living room, and she had told me, the word is told because she was not asking a question, that she wanted the house to go to Daniel and me jointly, but that she was worried. Carla will want it, she said. I know, I said. She'll want it for the rental income, she said. She'll want to put it on the market. I said nothing. I already knew this. I had watched Carla walk through the house twice in the prior 6 months with a measuring tape, the way a person measures something they already consider theirs. I want you to have it, Dottie said. She was looking at me with the particular steadiness of a woman who has already made her decision and is now watching to see if the other person understands it completely. Not just Daniel.
You.
Because you will keep it. We called her attorney the following week. I drove her to the appointment. I sat in the waiting room while they were inside, and I read a file I had brought from work because I cannot sit still, and 40 minutes later Dottie came out with a folder tucked under her arm and the notary's seal still visibly fresh on the top page. She handed it to me in the parking lot. She did not say anything when she did it. She just pressed it into my hands and got into the passenger seat, and I stood there in the February cold reading the cover page. Sole transferee upon death, Serena Marsh, and then I put it in my tote bag and drove her home. I had kept it in the fireproof cabinet since that day. Every time something happened with Carla, every pointed comment, every clipboard, every measuring tape, I thought about the recording date on the front page. I did not need to open the folder to remember it. I had read it in a parking lot in February, and I had not forgotten a single line. But I did not open it. Not yet. The first time Carla showed what she intended, it was 11 days after Dottie's funeral. I was at the house on Delmarva Court because someone needed to be, because the mail was piling up and the cinnamon sachets needed to be replaced, and the neighbor's kid had left a basketball in the backyard, and it seemed like the kind of detail that would bother Dottie if she could see it. I was in the kitchen when Carla came in through the back door, without knocking. She had a young man with her. He was carrying a clipboard. They always seem to carry clipboards, the people Carla brings to houses, and he was looking at the baseboards with the slightly distracted expression of someone calculating square footage in his head. Oh, Carla said when she saw me. She didn't stop walking. I didn't know you'd be here. I'm handling the mail, I said. Right. She moved into the living room. I heard her say something to the young man, something low, something I couldn't make out, and then she came back to the kitchen doorway. I was just having someone look at the bones. You know, before we decide. Before we decide what? I said. She smiled. What to do with the property? I said nothing. I mean, it makes more sense to sell, she said. Daniel and I talked about it. The rental income from Birch Street is fine, but a sale at this market would be. She tilted her head, the way she did when she was performing reasonableness. It would be significant. For all of us. The young man came back through the living room and said something to Carla about the roof, and she nodded, as though this was a conversation that had been ongoing for weeks. Because it had been. I understood that now. I understood that this conversation had been ongoing since January at least, which was before Dottie had made her call to the attorney, which meant Carla had been inside this timeline longer than she knew I knew. Something in me had gone to a specific kind of cold, not anger, not even resolve, but the precise, calibrated stillness of a woman who has been handed the answer to a problem she hasn't asked out loud yet. "I'll let you finish," I said. I picked up the mail. I left through the front door. I sat in my car in the driveway for 4 minutes with the blue folder sitting in my tote bag on the passenger seat, and I did not open it, and I drove home. The second time, it was a phone call. 3 weeks after the house visit, Carla called me on a Wednesday evening while I was making dinner. I almost didn't answer. I almost let it go to voicemail, which would have been the smarter choice probably, but I had been raised by a woman who believed that not answering a phone was a form of dishonesty, and some things stay with you longer than you want them to. "Hey," Carla said when I picked up. Her voice was the warm, windowless kind. "I just wanted to loop you in." "On what?" I said. "I've been talking to a real estate attorney," she said. "Just to understand our options. As a family." A pause. "I know this is hard, Serena. I know you were close to Mom. We all were." I said nothing. "But practically speaking," she continued, "the estate is in probate, and Daniel and I think we've talked about this, the two of us, we think the cleanest outcome is a sale. We'd split it 3 ways, obviously. You'd get your portion." I noticed she said, "We've talked about this, the two of us." Not 3.
2.
Daniel and Carla. The way she phrased it assumed a shape to the family that placed me adjacent to it rather than inside it. "I understand," I said. "Good," she said. "Because I've already called a listing agent. Just to get a number. I want us all to be prepared." I said nothing. She took my silence for agreement. That was the second mistake. The first was the measuring tape, which she hadn't known I'd seen, and I added it carefully to the list I was keeping in my head, the same way I kept every line of every document I had ever read, organized in reverse chronological order with the most important detail at the top. "I'll see you at the shower," she said.
Saturday.
"I'll be there," I said. We ended the call. I stood at my stove and watched the onions in the pan for a long moment, the way they moved, the way they went translucent at the edges and then caught and browned, and I thought about the recording date on the front page of the blue folder, and I thought about the notary seal, and I thought about the parking lot in February and Dottie's hands pressing the folder into mine. I turned off the burner. I ate something cold from the refrigerator. I went to bed early, and I slept very well. I want to tell you about the bathroom on the second floor of the house on Delmarva Court, because this is the part that nobody counted. In the spring of 2021, 14 months before Dottie's health began its final decline and 31 months before the baby shower, I retiled that bathroom over the course of 3 weekends. Not because anyone asked me to. Not because Daniel offered to help, though he did carry the cement board up the stairs, and that counted for something. But because Dottie had mentioned once, the way she mentioned things, gently, without expectation, that the grout around the tub had been failing since her second husband's last illness, and she'd never gotten around to it. I got around to it. I watched 12 videos. I rented a tile saw from the hardware store on Route 9 for $42 a day. I spent a total of 19 hours on my knees on that bathroom floor across 3 weekends in April and May, and when it was done, the grout lines were straight, and the tile was a warm cream that matched the sachets in the kitchen drawers, and Dottie stood in the doorway and said nothing for a moment, and then said, "You did this yourself." "I did," I said. "Daniel doesn't know how to do this," she said. "No," I said. She looked at me for a moment with the same steadiness she would use 2 years later in the reading chair. "You stay," she said. It wasn't a command. It was an observation, the way you'd observe that a particular tree has deep roots. She was noting it for the record. I picked up the tile saw and started breaking down the leftover cuts for disposal, and she went back downstairs to make coffee, and I thought nothing of it at the time except that I was tired and my knees hurt, and the grout lines were straight. That was the first thing nobody counted. The second was the winter of 2022. Dottie's health had moved into a phase that her cardiologist described as managed but progressive, which was the kind of language that means the trajectory is clear but the timeline is not. She needed someone at the house on Tuesdays and Thursdays, not full-time care, just presence, Just someone to drive her to the pharmacy and make sure she was eating and sit with her in the afternoons when the light went flat and the house got quiet in the particular way that empty houses get quiet when their owners begin to feel their own age. I took those days. Every Tuesday and Thursday from November of 2022 through March of 2023, 16 months, 62 individual afternoons, most of them spent in the kitchen or the reading room or the back garden when the weather allowed. Daniel came when he could. He came, I would say, perhaps a quarter of those times. He had a demanding job. I had a demanding job. The difference was that I rearranged mine. I billed Tuesday and Thursday afternoons as remote work, and I sat at Dottie's kitchen table with my laptop and my files, and I worked while she watched her programs, and twice a week I drove her to the pharmacy on Clement Street, and twice a week I made sure there was something warm on the stove before I left, and I did this for 16 months without anyone in the Marsh family acknowledging it as a contribution, because it did not look like a contribution. It looked like a daughter-in-law visiting. It looked like the ordinary background behavior of a woman who is present, which is the kind of thing that becomes invisible precisely because it happens every time. Carla visited the house on Delmarva Court 4 times during those 16 months. I counted, not because I was keeping score. I was not keeping score. I was keeping records, which is different because records are not about winning. Records are about what actually happened, which is sometimes the only thing standing between a person and a version of events that someone else has decided to substitute for the truth. The baby shower ended at 1:15. I knew it ended at 1:15 because I was the one who broke down the balloon arch. Carla had disappeared into the back bedroom with her college roommate to look at something on a phone, and I carried the deflated Mylar to the recycling bin and stacked the folded tablecloths on the kitchen counter and washed the serving platters by hand because the dishwasher had a full cycle running, and I did not want to leave Dottie's platters sitting in the sink. Patricia found me at the kitchen window with my hands still wet.
"You don't have to do all that," she said.
"I know," I said. She stood in the doorway for a moment. Patricia was 61 and had been watching this family from a lateral angle for 30 years, which meant she saw things she rarely commented on. Today she was close to commenting. I could see it in the way she held her coffee cup, both hands slightly too tight. "She didn't mean it," Patricia said. "About the shoes. She gets like that when she's nervous." I dried my hands on the dish towel. The towel had Dottie's embroidered border on it, small blue flowers along the hem, and I folded it with the border facing out the way Dottie had always done. "I know," I said. Patricia watched me for another moment. Then she set down her cup and came to the sink and picked up the last platter and dried it herself without being asked, and that was the kindest thing anyone did to me that entire afternoon, and neither of us mentioned the shoes again. I left at 1:40. I drove home with the blue folder still in my tote bag and the windows down because the afternoon had turned warm and the air smelled like cut grass and something blooming that I couldn't name, and I thought about nothing in particular for 22 minutes, which was the exact length of the drive. Daniel called that evening at 7. He called from his brother-in-law's house, where he'd gone after his Saturday morning run to watch a game, which meant he had been 3 miles from the baby's shower all afternoon and had not come.
This was not a new pattern.
Daniel was good at proximity without presence. He could be in the same zip code as a difficult situation and remain genuinely unaware that it had occurred. "How was it?" he said.
"Fine," I said.
"Carla seems happy," he said. "She sent me pictures." I said nothing. "The balloon thing looked good," he said. "Did you do that?" "Carla ordered it," I said. A pause. I heard the television in the background, crowd noise, something with a halftime buzzer. "She mentioned you too, had a weird moment." "Did she?" I said. "She said you seemed upset about something. About a comment she made." His voice had the particular careful quality of a man who had already received one version of a story and was now performing the act of hearing a second one. "Was it about the shoes thing?" I sat down at the kitchen table. The light through the window was the low amber of early evening, and it caught the edge of the salt cellar Dottie had given us as a wedding gift and threw a small shadow across the table that looked almost like a pointing finger. "She said it in front of 8 people, I said. "She's pregnant," Daniel said. "She's just, you know how she gets. She doesn't filter." I said nothing. "Serena." His voice was not unkind. That was the difficult part. Daniel's voice was almost never unkind, which made it very hard to explain to anyone on the outside that the problem was not cruelty, but erasure, which is quieter and goes on longer. She's about to have a baby. Can we just let it go? The shadow on the table had shifted slightly. I watched it. Sure, I said.
Good, he said. He sounded relieved.
I'll be home by 9. I ended the call. I put the phone face down on the table, and I sat with the amber light for a while, and I thought about the word let, about what it meant to let something go, about the physics of release, about the difference between letting go and simply choosing not to pick it up in the first place. I went to bed before Daniel got home. I set my alarm for 5:30, and I slept without interruption, which was something I had gotten very good at over the past several years. The following Tuesday, Carla called Daniel. I knew she called Daniel because Daniel told me about it over breakfast on Wednesday, in the careful way he shared information he had been sitting with overnight. He poured coffee. He set the mug in front of me. He said, "Carla talked to a listing agent. She mentioned that," I said, "on the phone, a few weeks ago. She got a number," he said, "for the house." He sat down across from me. It's a significant number, Serena. The market out there right now." "I know the market," I said. He looked at me. "She thinks we should move on it before summer." I picked at my coffee. The ceramic was warm against my palms, and I held it for a moment before I drank. Just the warmth, just the weight of it. "The estate hasn't cleared probate," I said.
"She knows that," Daniel said.
She's planning ahead." "Planning ahead," I said. "She's having a baby," he said. "She's thinking about what the family's going to look like. Financially. Going forward."
He paused.
"The listing agent said we could list at 950, maybe $1 million if we wait until May." I said nothing. "That's 3 ways, Serena. He did the math in his head, which took him a moment, which told me he had already done it several times before this conversation. "That's 315 each, roughly." A cardinal landed on the feeder outside the kitchen window. It sat there for a moment, very red against the gray of the morning, and then it was gone. "I need to think about it," I said. "Okay," Daniel said. He sounded like he thought thinking was a formality. "Just don't take too long. She's already talking to the listing agent about timing." I finished my coffee. I rinsed the mug. I went to work. The person I called that Thursday was not a listing agent. Her name was Vivian Cole, and she was a property law attorney I had worked with twice in the course of estate dispute audits, once on a contested trust in 2020 and once on a forged transfer deed in 2022, which was a case that had taken 8 months and ended with a settlement that I was not allowed to discuss. She was 63 years old and had the voice of a woman who had heard every version of every story and had stopped being surprised sometime during the second Bush administration. I sat in my car in the parking garage beneath my office building and called her at 12:15 on my lunch break. "Serena," she said when she picked up. "It's been a while." "It has," I said. "I need a consult. Personal matter." A brief pause. "How personal?" "Property transfer. Pre-death, notarized, properly recorded. Family is proceeding as though it doesn't exist." Another pause, longer. "Do you have the document?" "I have everything," I said. "Of course you do," she said, and I heard something in her voice that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. "When can you come in?" We scheduled for the following Monday. I sat in the parking garage for another few minutes after the call ended, listening to the ventilation system and the distant sound of a car reversing somewhere on an upper level, and I thought about the word recorded, the specific legal weight of it, the way it meant the document existed in a county record that predated any conversation Carla had ever had with any listing agent. The blue folder was in my tote bag. I did not open it. I knew what it said. I want to tell you what the Monday appointment was like because it is important to understand what it feels like to sit across from a competent professional and watch them read something you have been carrying alone for months. Vivian's office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown, corner suite, 2 windows looking east. She had a long table rather than a desk, the kind that said she preferred to spread things out and look at them from different angles, and she was already at the table when I came in, with a yellow legal pad in front of her and her reading glasses pushed up onto her forehead. I set the blue folder on the table in front of her. She put on her glasses. She opened the folder. She read the first page, then the second, then went back to the first. This took approximately 4 minutes, during which I sat in the chair across from her and looked at the windows and watched a plane cross the eastern sky, very high, leaving a thin white line that started to dissolve almost immediately. "When was this recorded?" she said, without looking up. "It's on page 1, I said. "Date stamp, upper right." She looked. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "And the family is actively pursuing a sale."
"They have a listing agent," I said.
"They're discussing timing." "Has anyone filed anything with the estate?"
"Not yet," I said.
"Probate is still open." She took off her glasses. She set them on the table and looked at me with the level, unornamented attention of a woman who has learned to separate what she thinks from what she says, and who says only what is useful. "Serena, do they know this document exists?" I said nothing. She nodded slowly, as though I had said something. "All right," she said. She picked up her pen. "Here's what I need from you. I need the original, certified copy for filing. That's what you've brought me. So good. I need the county recording confirmation, which should be on page 3. I need any correspondence, emails, texts, voicemails, in which the family has discussed the property as though it were part of the estate pool. And I need you to not discuss this with your husband or your sister-in-law until I tell you to."
"I understand," I said.
"The recording date is the controlling fact," she said. "Everything else is just noise management." I said nothing. I looked at the plane trail, which had already gone. She leaned forward. "This is solid, Serena.
"I want you to understand that.
Whatever they've been telling you about the estate, whatever conversations they've been having with agents, none of that matters. The recording date controls." A tightness moved through my chest. Not relief, not yet, but the preliminary sensation of relief, the way a room warms before the heat actually arrives. I kept my face even. I thanked her. I left. The correspondence file took me 4 evenings to compile. Not because it was disorganized. I was not disorganized. I had never been disorganized, but because I was thorough, and thoroughness takes time that rushing cannot replace. I went through every text message in my thread with Carlos and Stotty's death, 112 messages, of which 19 were relevant. I pulled the voicemail she had left me the Wednesday evening, the one about the real estate attorney and the listing agent, and the word "we" used to mean Daniel and Carla, and not Daniel and Serena. I found the email Daniel had forwarded me from Carla's listing agent, which included a preliminary market analysis with the address of the house on Delmarva Court in the header and a suggested list price, and a proposed timeline that had Carla's name in the CC field and mine nowhere at all. I printed everything. I organized it in reverse chronological order. I added a cover sheet with the subject property address, the recording date of the transfer deed, and a single line at the top that said, "Timeline of communications regarding property subject to prior recorded transfer." I sent the package to Vivian on a Thursday evening and received a response at 7:45 the following morning that said only, "This is thorough. We'll call Monday." I went to work. I billed my hours. I came home. I made dinner. Daniel talked about a project at his office, and I listened and asked questions and cleared the table, and he did not ask me what I had been working on in the evenings, and I did not tell him. The blue folder went back into the fireproof cabinet on the Thursday evening after I had given the certified copy to Vivian. I knew what was in it. I did not need to look. Vivian called Monday as promised at 9:10 while I was still in my car in the parking garage. "I've reviewed everything," she said. "The correspondence is exactly what we need. The voicemail is particularly useful. She explicitly characterizes the property as part of the estate pool, which is a direct factual misrepresentation given the recording date." "Is that actionable?" I said.
"On its own, no," she said.
"In context, it establishes intent. It shows this wasn't an oversight." A pause. "Has she taken any steps toward a formal listing?" "Daniel said she was talking about timing," I said. "Before summer." "Before summer," Vivian repeated, in the tone of a woman writing something down. "All right. Here's where we are. The transfer is airtight. The question is how this resolves, whether quietly or publicly." "What does quietly look like?"
I said.
"I send a letter to the estate's probate attorney informing them of the prior recorded transfer. The estate removes the property from its inventory. Carla's listing agent loses a listing. Everyone goes home. And publicly? I said.
A beat.
Publicly means they contest it. They claim the transfer was obtained under undue influence, or that Dottie lacked capacity, or that the recording was procedurally defective, none of which will hold, based on what you've given me, but it means we're in litigation for 6 to 18 months. I watched the ventilation fan on the wall of the parking garage turn in its slow circle. What do you recommend?
I said.
Start quiet, she said. Reserve public. A pause. But Serena, you may not get to choose. If they've already engaged an estate attorney of their own, we may be past the quiet stage. Have they?
I said.
I made some calls, she said. Not formally, just listening. There's been an inquiry to the probate court about the property's status. Filed 10 days ago. I sat with that for a moment. 10 days ago. Before the baby shower. Before the shoes. Before Carla stood in the center of the living room with the warm, windowless voice and looked at my feet and made the room laugh. She had filed an inquiry 10 days before the baby shower, while she was organizing the balloon arch and the white tablecloths and the gold foil letters, while she was making a clipboard. All right, I said. Send the letter. I'll file it this week, Vivian said. You'll want to be available for follow-up. And Serena, when this reaches the family, it's going to reach your husband too. I know, I said. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the amber light through the kitchen window. I thought about the embroidered dish towel. I thought about Daniel's voice saying she's just having a baby, and can we just let it go, and the television crowd noise in the background, 3 miles away, close enough to have come and far enough to have an excuse. Yes, I said. Vivian's letter went to the probate attorney on a Wednesday. By Friday afternoon, I had received a text from Daniel that said, "Can you talk tonight?" By Friday evening, I had received a call from Carla that I let go to voicemail. I listened to the voicemail once, standing in the kitchen while the pasta water came to a boil. Her voice was still warm. It had the particular warmth of someone who had just received news they were not expecting and had not yet decided how to process it, so they defaulted to warmth because warmth was their instrument, and they did not have another one ready.
Serena, she said.
I think there's been some kind of mix-up. I'd love to can we talk? Before this gets complicated? I think there's something you might not understand about what Mom intended, and I think if we talked, we could clear this up. A pause. Call me back. I set the phone down on the counter. The pasta water had started to move, not boiling yet, just the preliminary shiver of water that is about to change its state, small bubbles forming at the bottom and rising and dissolving before they reach the surface. I did not call her back. I made dinner. I ate. I washed the pot. I went to the second bedroom and I stood in front of the fireproof cabinet for a moment, not opening it, just standing there the way you stand near something you trust, and then I turned off the light and went to bed. Daniel was already at the kitchen table when I came downstairs on Saturday morning. He had made coffee, both mugs, which meant he had been sitting there for a while, waiting for me to come down rather than coming to find me, which was Daniel's way of signaling that he wanted a conversation that felt chosen rather than cornered. He was in the chair closest to the window. His hands were around his mug. He looked tired in the specific way of someone who had not slept badly but had slept short and had spent the awake hours doing a kind of mental arithmetic that had not come out even. I sat down. I picked up the second mug. "Vivian Cole," he said. "Yes," I said. "You hired a property attorney." "I did," I said. He looked at his coffee. A long pause. Not angry, not wounded, something more like recalibrating, the way a person recalibrates when they discover the map they've been using has an error in it. "When were you going to tell me?" "When there was something definite to tell," I said. "There's something definite now," he said. "There is," I said. He was quiet for a moment. Outside the kitchen window, the cardinal feeder was empty. I had forgotten to fill it on Friday, which was unlike me, and I noticed the absence the way you notice a word missing from a sentence you've memorized. "Is the transfer real?" he said. Is it actually recorded?" "Page 1, I said. "Date stamp, upper right. County Recorder's Office, 11 weeks before your mother died." He absorbed this. I watched his hands tighten slightly around the mug and then release. "She never told me," he said. She told me, I said. Another pause. In the parking lot, he said. He had read Vivian's letter, then. Or Carla had read it to him. You drove her to the attorney. I did, I said. And you've had this document since February of last year. Yes, I said. He looked up at me. His face had the open, slightly undefended quality it got when he was not performing anything, when the situation had moved past the point where performance was available as an option. Why didn't you say anything? He said. When Carla started talking about the listing agent, why didn't you just say, this document exists, the house is already mine? I set down my mug. I looked at him steadily. Because I wanted to see what the family would do, I said, when they believed I had nothing. The kitchen was very quiet. The feeder outside moved slightly in a wind I couldn't hear through the glass. Daniel sat with that for a long time. I did not fill the silence. The silence was not mine to fill. It belonged to him. It was the space in which he had to decide something about himself, about what he had done and not done over the past months, about the measuring tape and the listing agent and the Wednesday phone call, and 3 miles away at his brother-in-law's house during the baby shower. I should have come Saturday, he said finally. Yes, I said. The shoes thing. Daniel, I said, and something in my voice, not volume, not heat, just a specific quality of arrival, of having reached the point past which there was no more diplomatic approach, made him stop. I spent 19 hours on my knees retiling your mother's bathroom. I drove her to her cardiologist 62 times over 16 months. I kept her records, her medications, her files. I sat with her on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons for over a year because she asked me to, and because I cared about her, and because it was right. I picked at my coffee. And your sister stood in a room full of people and laughed at my shoes in your mother's house. And you told me to let it go. He said nothing. I am not angry at you, I said. I need you to understand that. But I need you to also understand what happened and what didn't happen and why I handled this the way I did. He nodded. Once. The nod of a man who had arrived, finally, at the correct answer to a question he should have asked months ago. What happens now? He said. There's a meeting, I said. Vivian has requested a family conference with the probate attorney. Thursday afternoon. You, me, Carla, the attorneys. And the house, he said. Is mine, I said. That's not the meeting's question. That's already answered. The meeting is just the part where everyone finds that out at the same time. The conference room on the 9th floor of the probate attorney's building was the kind of room designed to make difficult conversations feel procedural. Neutral carpet, a long table with water glasses already poured, Venetian blinds at half-mast against the afternoon light. It smelled faintly of printer toner and the particular recycled air flatness of a room that had held many unhappy families before ours. Carla was already there when Daniel and I arrived. She had come with her own attorney, a man named Greer, who had the compact, efficient energy of someone billing by the 6-minute increment. She was wearing a blue dress, and her hair was neat, and her hands were folded on the table in front of her, and she looked at me when I came in with an expression I recognized, the performance of reasonableness, which is what Carla wore when she was most afraid. Vivian was beside me. She set her briefcase on the table and opened it without ceremony and removed a single document set, paper-clipped, which she placed face down at her elbow. The probate attorney, a woman named Sheridan who had the patient, unsurprisable manner of someone who had seen this specific drama in many different costumes, opened the meeting by reviewing the estate inventory and the pending status of the Delmarva court property. She was professional and thorough and took approximately 8 minutes to establish the procedural context, during which Carla watched me and I watched the water glass in front of me, and Daniel looked at the table. When Sheridan finished, Greer said, "Our position is that the property is properly part of the estate, subject to standard distribution, and that any instrument purporting to transfer the property prior to death should be reviewed for capacity and undue influence, given Mrs. Marsh Sr.'s documented health decline in the final." "The instrument has already been reviewed," Vivian said. She said it the way you set a glass down, no force, just placement. "By me, and independently by the county recorder's office, whose stamp appears on the document." Mrs. Marsh Sr.'s capacity was evaluated and confirmed by her attending physician on the same day as the transfer, as required by the notary's protocol. The documentation for that evaluation is included in our filing. Greer paused. We weren't aware of the physician confirmation. It's on page 4, Vivian said. Carla's hands, folded on the table, tightened.
I saw it.
Her knuckles went briefly pale, and then she consciously relaxed them, finger by finger, in the practiced way of someone managing a physical response they don't want witnessed. Carla, I said. She looked at me. I want to show you something, I said. I reached into my tote bag. I had carried the blue folder in that bag to and from this building the same way I had carried it to the baby shower, to Patricia's comment at the kitchen window, to every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon on Delmarva Court for the better part of 2 years, present known, unread by anyone in this room except me and Vivian and the county recorder's clerk who had stamped it on a Thursday in February. I set it on the table. I opened it. The first page was the transfer deed. The state seal was in the upper left. The recording date was in the upper right, stamped in the blue-black ink of the county recorder's office. February 14th, a date I had not chosen, a date Dottie's attorney had scheduled, a date that now sat on a conference room table in the afternoon light like a thing that had always been true and had simply been waiting for the right room. Below the date, in the clean typography of a legal document, sole transferee upon death, Serena Diane Marsh. I turned the folder, so it faced Carla. She read it. I watched her read it, watched her eyes move to the date, then to the name, then back to the date. Her attorney leaned in and read it too. The room was very quiet. Sheridan, the probate attorney, made a note on her legal pad without looking up. This was recorded, Carla said. Not a question. Her voice had lost its warmth, not become cold, just become accurate. She was stating a fact she was still in the process of accepting. 11 weeks before your mother died, I said. She didn't tell me, Carla said. No, I said. She told me. Carla sat with that. I watched the thing that moved across her face. It was not anger, it was not grief exactly. It was something more like a recalculation, the way a person looks when they realize the structure they have been building has been constructed on a premise that was never true. She had believed the house was available. She had believed it the way people believe things that are convenient to believe, not through investigation, but through the comfortable momentum of assumption. I visited 4 times, she said quietly. It took me a moment to understand what she meant. Then I understood. She was counting. She had been counting too. She had known, somewhere, that the visits meant something, that the gap between her 4 and my 62 was a number that would eventually need to be accounted for. I know, I said. Greer said something to her in a low voice. She shook her head slightly, a small, definite motion that meant don't, and he settled back. Is there anything in the document you want to contest? Vivian said. Her voice was level and without edge. She was not performing victory. She was simply holding the door open and waiting to see if anyone wanted to walk through it. Carla looked at the folder for another moment. Then she looked at me. The warmth was gone, and what was under it was something I had not seen from her before, something unguarded, something that might, in a different life, have been the beginning of a real conversation. No, she said. There isn't. Sheridan made another note. I'll update the estate inventory to reflect the prior transfer, she said. The property will be removed from the pool. She looked around the table. Is there anything else? There was nothing else. Daniel and I drove home separately. He had come from work, and I had come from the parking garage where I had sat in my car for 6 minutes before going up, and we did not speak in the elevator or in the lobby, but when we got home he was already at the kitchen table, and he had, again, made 2 mugs of coffee, and this time I sat down before he had to wait. I should have come to the shower, he said. Yes, I said. I should have come a lot of places, he said. The Tuesdays. The Thursdays. Yes, I said. He wrapped both hands around his mug. I didn't know what she'd done. With the house. With the document. I know you didn't, I said. But, Daniel, the document isn't why I showed up on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I looked at him steadily. I showed up because your mother asked me to, and because I loved her. The document is just what happened to come from that. He nodded. His jaw was tight in the way it got when he was holding something he hadn't yet put into words. "I'm sorry," he said. "For the shoes. For letting her. For not saying something." I looked out the kitchen window. The feeder was still empty. I made a note to fill it in the morning.
"I know," I said.
We sat there for a while in the kitchen with the coffee and the empty feeder and the particular quiet of a house that has been through something and is now settling back into itself, and I thought about Dottie pressing the blue folder into my hands in a February parking lot and saying nothing, because she had already said everything she needed to say inside the attorney's office, and she trusted me to carry it until the right moment. I had carried it. That was what I did. I kept things. The house on Delmarva Court had her reading chair in the corner, and her embroidered dish towels in the kitchen drawer, and her bathroom tiles set in straight lines that I had put there on my knees over 3 weekends in April and May. It had her cinnamon sachets and her cardinal feeder and 22 years of a family's particular way of existing in space. It was mine, not because I had won something, but because I had stayed. If you took anything from Serena's story, let it be this. The record you keep quietly is the one that speaks loudest when it counts. You don't have to announce what you've built. You just have to have built it. Share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. The record speaks. You just have to have kept it.